are a guest with us for the first time and would like to have information about Redemption Church, there is a guest information card out by the offering box out this door. If you want to fill it out and drop it in, give us a chance just to share with you the things that are happening here at Redemption, the ministry that we have going on here, and we'd love to share that with you. And so if you have an opportunity to do that, that'd be great. There are a few of you in here who probably have not been involved in this series for a while, so I'm going to catch up a little bit. And today we're talking about God's fulfilling His promises, okay? And we've been in 1st and 2nd Samuel for the bulk of the year. And up to this point, here's kind of what we've seen. And right now we're kind of on the David picture of the scene of 1st and 2nd Samuel. And David, if you remember, for quite some time, has been he had that back and forth relationship with Saul, who loved him for a second, hated him more than not. Back and forth, wanted to kill him. David's on the run. He's trying to figure out what to do. At the same time, David's being this warrior for God, and he's defeating these kingdoms, and all these things are happening, right? And then we saw a transition where King Saul dies. David becomes the king of Israel. He also makes some mistakes that we see David doing really well. And then remember in the first half of, I believe it was chapter 6, David kind of rushes the ark into the kingdom, and in that Uzzah dies because they were not doing things properly the way God asked him to. And so then the second half, David does it right and honors God by the way that they treat the ark and his presence coming in. And David is on this high. He's loving the Lord. He is praising God for all that's going on. He's absolutely in touch with, at this moment, man, God is the Lord of all things, and everyone needs to know that. That's kind of where David's at this point and at this moment in time. And last week we talked about, God's promise to David, and also David, see, blah, 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 blah. Yes, David's praise of God. And I want to read you this from last week, chapter 7, 2 Samuel, verse 9. And this is God talking through the prophet. He says, "And I have been with you wherever you went, and I've cut off all your enemies from before you, and I will make you a great name, like the name of the great ones of the earth. And I will appoint a place for my people Israel, and I will plant them so that they may dwell in their own place and be disturbed no more. And violent men shall afflict no more as formerly. From that time that I appointed judges over my people Israel, and I will give you rest from all your enemies moreover." So, God promised David in the last chapter that there is going to be peace. He's promising them that they're going to defeat their enemies. He's making this promise that he's going to have a great name. God is making all these promises, and we're going to see these promises fulfilled. It's important, though, chapter 8 is one of those chapters that if you're reading the Bible, you're like, I don't understand why. What do I do with this? Because it's really a telling of David's victories here. There's not a whole lot of go do this as a Christian and this is how you're supposed to be. It's one of these, but there's so much that happens here that's important to the history of all that we are as believers. This is a crucial piece of the story. And so today we're talking about God fulfilling His promises, and we're in 2 Samuel chapter 8. And so if you have your Bibles with you, let's dive right on in. After this, David defeated the Philistines and subdued them. And David took Methag Ammah out of the hands of the Philistines. And he defeated Moab, and he measured them with a line, making them lie down on the ground. 2 lines he measured to be put to death, and 1 full line to be spared. And the Moabites became servants to David and brought tribute. David also defeated Hadadezer, the son of Rehob, king of Zobah, as he went to restore his power at the river Euphrates. And David took from him 1,700 horsemen and 20,000 foot soldiers. And David hamstrung all the chariot horses, but left enough for 100 chariots. And when the Syrians of Damascus came to help Hadadezer, king of Zobah, David struck down 22,000 men of the Syrians. Then David put garrisons in Aram of Damascus, and the Syrians became servants to David and brought tribute. And the Lord gave victory to David wherever he went. And David took the shields of gold that were carried by the servants of Hadadezer and brought them to Jerusalem. And from Betah and from Berothai, cities of Hadadezer, King David took very much bronze. When Toi, king of Hamath, heard that David had defeated the whole army of Hadadezer, Toi sent his son Jerome to King David to ask about his health and to bless him, because he had fought against Hadadezer and defeated him. For Hadadezer had been at war with Toi. And Jerome brought with him articles of silver, of gold, and of bronze. These also King David dedicated to the Lord, together with the silver and the gold that he had dedicated from all the nations he subdued, from Edom, Moab, the Ammonites, the Philistines, Amalek, and from the spoil of Hadadezer, the son of Rehob, king of Zobah. And David made a name for himself when he returned from striking down 18,000 Edomites in the valley of the Salt. Then he put garrisons in Edom. Throughout all Edom he put garrisons, and all the Edomites became David's servants. And the Lord gave victory to David wherever he went. So David reigned over all Israel, and David administered justice and equity to all his people. Joab the son of Zeruiah was over the army, and Jehoshaphat the son of Ahilud was recorder, and Zodek the son of Atub and Emelech the son of Abiathar were priests, and Sariah was secretary. And Benaniah the son of Jehoiada was over the Cherethites and the Pelethites, and David's sons were priests. You got to remember when you're reading the Old Testament, the big picture here is the story of how God threads this line of the Redeemer coming to redeem his people. This is what we're seeing through all these things. God is continuing through all these processes, building up for Jesus. All this is about coming to redeem his people back to himself. And so this is an important, crucial piece of the story. In a second here, I'm going to show you a map of how all this plays out, because if you remember in the past, if you don't, that's okay. The warring nations around them were just awful to the Israelites, right? The Philistines were just raiding and harming and causing just drastic and awful damage to these people. And all the warring tribes around him. If you remember Saul, if you're reading in 1 Samuel, Saul wasn't able to really do much with these things either. And God's going to promise, and his promises come true in chapter 8 here, that there's going to be peace and that David's going to be able to take care of his enemies. And that's the promise that God gets. Now, here's the cool thing. We're going to kind of walk through this for a second, all right? So I'm going to kind of show you a little bit what's happening here. And I'm sorry if I do this because I didn't put a map in front of me. So, first of all, David in chapter 1, verse 1 says, David took Methag Ammah out of the hand of the Philistines. Now, that's most likely a stronghold before the city of Gath. Now, Gath is, if you remember, before David retreated there, but when he was running from Saul. And Gath is an important city to hold. And they call this sometimes the bridle of the city, like Gath, the Methag Ammah is that important piece that if you get that down the road, you're going to get Gath. So David takes that first, and the Philistines are all on the left coast here, right? They're all on the line here. David's kind of right in the middle there. He goes there first. He takes Methag Ammah, and everything's going good there. The stronghold is the future victory of taking on that area, okay? He defeated then Moab, which is over here on the right there. Moab, and he measured them with a line, making them lie down on the ground, 2 lines measured between them to be put to death, and 1 full line to be spared. And the Moabites became servants to David and brought tribute. Now I want to pause here for a second on this. It's important to know this. David, at heart, is a warrior. I know he's the king, but he's a warrior. I was talking with a friend this week that if you remember, God's calling and purpose on David was that very piece, because he doesn't get to finish the temple, if you remember, down the road, because there's so much blood on his hands, because his role in God's plan was to deliver these victories. That's David's role. Moab is no exception. David is trying to make a point here. So he takes 3 lines of people, and he kills the first 2, and leaves the 3rd line to be servants. David's trying to make a point that this is God's nation. Now, this is not something that translates into a prescription of what we do now, okay? So you cannot go war anybody, okay? That's just not, this is a narrative, okay? It's important to understand this is not something that we do. It's important to know how the history of how this happened, okay? So this is a narrative of what we got going on. So David takes on Moab, another huge thing. Now, here's a funny thing. If you remember, and if you don't, a few chapters ago when David was running from Saul, he hid his family in Moab. And it's, you're wondering, why would David do this to a place that had taken care of his family? Because when Saul was coming after him, he was concerned. If you remember, his great-grandmother was in Moab. There's a Jewish tradition story, and there's no proof of this really, that the Moabites killed David's parents. We don't know that for sure, but it's possible motivation of why Moab got what they got. And so remember, David, warrior, king who's taking care of doing what God has called him to do to bring peace back into Israel. He does this with Moab, okay? So then, verse 3, David also defeated Hadadezer, the son of Rahab, king of Zobah, as he went to restore his power at the river Euphrates. Now, that's going to be up near the top. He's on the top side here, a little northeast of David. And David took from him 1,700 horsemen and 20,000 foot soldiers, and David hamstrung all the chariot horses but left enough for 100 chariots. Now, I'm going to briefly mention this to you too. David goes in to defeat this army. He hamstrings the horses, which basically means he cut the backs of the horses of these chariots so that they cannot pursue him, and left 100 left. David is trying to make a point, and he's trying to declare peace in this nation. I know that's an awful thing. Again, not prescriptive, just a description of the narrative of what's going on here. So David is doing this thing right now. We're watching David pretty much create this time of peace through God's hand is creating this, but we're seeing David as his vessel. So David goes on with that one. And then David put garrisons, verse 5. When the Syrians of Damascus came to help Hadadezer, king of Zobah, David struck down 22,000 men of Syrians. So Damascus is just right up there in the middle, right a little bit below Hadadezer, and they're going to come up and help him out. David takes all them out. Then David put garrisons in Aram of Damascus, and the Syrians took the shields of gold that were carried by his servants of Hadadezer and brought them to Jerusalem. And from Betah and from Berothai, cities of Hadadezer, King David took very much bronze. So he sets up garrisons, which are military posts, so that he can kind of keep an eye on what's going on up here. He wants to keep this peace where it's at. These people have been warring and just brutally attacking the Israelites for years and years and years, and David's creating peace now. It doesn't sound like it, but that's going to be the outcome of this, okay? And so then, next, when Toi, king of Hamath, heard that David has defeated the whole army of Hadadezer, Toi sent his son Joram to King David to ask about his health and to bless him, because he had fought against Hadadezer and defeated him, for Hadadezer had often been at war with Toi. And Joram brought with him articles of silver, of gold, and of bronze. So we're going to pause. He's right on the very top, Hamath, and Toi's up there. He's coming down. He's like, hey, I've had a problem with this guy as well. I'm grateful that you've been able to create this peace. Thank you, and here is your reward. He gives him some gold and some bronze. And these also King David dedicated to the Lord, together with the silver and the gold that he dedicated from all the nations he subdued, from Edom, Moab, the Ammonites, the Philistines, Amalek, and from the spoils of Hadadezer, the son of Rehob, king of Zobah. Now, I want you to look at this for a second. All except for the area where David would have been right around in Jerusalem, Jericho, and there, all these were warring nations, and God used David to bring all of this back into the big picture of how he's going to use this for his future deliverance of the Redeemer. Like, this is all important. If these nations didn't come into play here, if these all didn't come to a peace, this wouldn't have worked this way. And God's using David as his vessel to make this happen. And so we're seeing here in this story, these victories are not just random victories. They're specific to the purpose of the Redeemer. Now, here's the thing. We come here every Sunday morning, and we praise the name of God because of the work that Jesus Christ did on the cross. And Jesus Christ is the reason why we do everything that we do. And this is the beginning of, not the beginning, because he was in the beginning, but this is the story of the way God used his people to bring the deliverer from this. And so God's still fulfilling his promises. Now, you're looking at all this, and it's like, man, that's a pretty brutal scenario. Yeah, that's rough, but okay, what do we take from a story like this? How do we look at this and apply this at all to anything that we have going on? Well, there's some really cool pieces that we need to look at here. First of all, verse 11, David's going through all of this battle. He's warring all these people in verse 11, and he said, if the Syrians are too strong, I'm in the wrong chapter. Verse 11, these also King David dedicated to the Lord, together with the silver and the gold that he dedicated from all the nations he subdued. So first of all, David makes a point from the last chapter, 2 chapters, when he's recognizing how amazing God is, how much he deserves all the glory, honor, and praise. David is at this point where he realizes that that is all that matters, and at this moment, he's giving everything back to God. He's like, this wasn't mine to begin with. We're taking these spoils in, and he's going to use it for the glory of God. And this is partly why we're seeing God grant David these victories, giving the spoils back to God. God's fulfilling his promises through David, and David is giving it back to him. Now, think about that process. Now, we don't think that way, do we? I don't think that way, right? I think when I get something, oh, that's really sweet. God, thanks, man. And then I keep it to myself. And I like it, and it's awesome, whether it be money or cars or kids. No, I'll give my kids to people. But I love y'all. You can stay. But like, we have this thing where we don't think about how the fact that what God has given us is his. And And I'm not even talking about tithing here. I'm talking about just the blessing that God bestows on his people. What is the purpose of that blessing? Is it so that he can make us really happy, cheery Christians? No, the purpose of his blessing is for his glory, right? He's using us for his glory. If you remember in Genesis chapter 1, we are creating in his image. To be made in his image means we are to reflect the image of God among others. And to reflect the image of God means we need to bestow God-like qualities to other people. Now, we are not ever God, and we can never become God, and none of that. But we can show the grace and the love and the mercy that God shows among his people, right? That's our responsibility. So giving back is just a piece of letting God's glory be reflected among the nations. So the nations might see David, but they know this is God's work. They know God is the one that is giving this to them, right? And that's the important part that we kind of miss sometimes in our own personal lives, in Christendom. Now, I get excited about little things, right? So money is great, but I'm even more excited. Like I remember, this is going to sound ridiculous, but last year we went to the Lighthouse thing and we helped serve food, and they had this bag of leftover runts that they let us take home with us. Like, I didn't want my kids to have those. I wanted them all myself. And I was super stoked. Now, that's not a parallel. I'm not saying runts has anything to do with this, but that's the way I work, though, right? Like, my blessing means my benefit, means I get to enjoy this. But that's not why we are wired and put here, right? It's not for our own benefit and blessing. It's to glorify God by blessing others. And so we see God channel this through David. David is getting this blessing. He's giving it back to God. There's much to be learned in that. With victory, we give God the glory. Now, it's easy for us in a culture that builds up celebrity, that builds up even people who have no reason to be celebrities can go online now and create themselves a name, and we get this idea that that's what it's all about, right, is to make ourselves known. But if you make yourself known for no other purpose than to make yourself known, then it is worthless. But if you're known because you are trying to reflect the image of God on others, and God is seen through you, like at the end of this all for me, when I'm gone, my prayer is that what people saw in me more than the stupid stuff is that I honored and reflected God in my life. That's my prayer. That's what I hope will happen. I've got a long way to go, whether it's even tomorrow or 20 years from now, to make that happen. But I want that to be the case, right? I'm trying to honor him through this situation. And so God giving us these blessings to give back to him to bless other people. That's the purpose of what we're here for. So David gets this big picture, right? Verse 13, he says, "And David then made a name for himself when he returned from striking down the Edomites." God gives the name. David, remember in chapter 7, I just said God promised him his name was going to be made. David has made a name for himself. He just conquered all of the Middle East there, right? David is doing this thing. But here's the important part that you need to notice about David. It was all for the glory of God in this picture. The whole point of David doing this was for God's glory. So David's name really isn't David getting the name. God is being named through this by David being glorified. God is being shown by David being glorified. God is being glorified by David's name being profound. God is using him as his vessel, and all of that David is doing is for the glory of God. Now, I don't want to paint this picture that David is this awesome, amazing guy that we should follow. You're reading the book wrong if you look that way. David is just as frail as we are. But at this moment and at this time, this is what God is using for him, right? God is using David to make his name known. He's building this up. David's name is only valuable because it reflects God. You having a celebrity status only works if you're giving God the glory and the honor for it. If not, it's worthless. Being known as the best of anything or the greatest of this and that has no bearing on any merit of anything in your life, because when it's all over, it matters nothing unless God has been glorified in it. That is the big picture here that we're seeing in David. None of that matters unless God is being glorified. And what we see here is David trying to point everyone back to him. He's made a name for himself because he is trying to be faithful and obedient to his Creator, to his Lord, to his Savior. David's name is reflecting God in these victories. God gives the name. God also grants the victory. We look at verse 6 and verse 14, right? Verse 6, it says, "And the Lord gave victory to David wherever he went." Verse 14, "Then he put the Edom, throughout all Edom, he put garrisons. And at the very end of that, and the Lord gave victory to David wherever he went. So like David is getting victory wherever he went. And the thing is, though, it's important here. While David is absolutely the warrior, he's the guy I would want to call if I had a military issue back in the day. He's definitely that guy. But he's not successful because he's awesome. David is not successful because he's just worked himself the hardest than anybody else, and he's just made himself the best guy. He's successful because God gave him the success. You're successful because God gives it to you. It's not what you have done. Now, I love a good work ethic. There is a part of being lazy that's not helpful. God has a difficulty using that sometimes. Not he can, but he tends to not use me when I'm lazy. Work ethic is important, but any success and victory comes because he chooses it to come. I love the idea of being able to work hard. Entrepreneurship is something I love talking about. Bobby and Daniel and I talk all the time about ideas, and working hard to create something and build things is just exciting to us. But the thing is, any victory, success we see, whether in the church, whether in our home lives, whatever, is because God gave it to us. It's not because we deserve it, or because we're great people, or that we earned that promotion, or that we were just so good to our wives, and we were just such great fathers. Man, we were just Father of the Year. I can assure you I'm not in the rankings for those. This got none of those things. It's because God has just decided, because he is God, to bestow his blessing upon you for his purpose of bestowing blessing upon others, for the purpose of glorifying himself. That's why this works. It's not about our blessing and comfort. It's about bringing the name of Christ to the community of those that are lost all around us and make it known to them so we can see them come to know Christ. That's the purpose of all of this. And that's why we do these things. So God's granting this victory. All of David's endeavors were victorious. I remember, and I know I refer this because these are pictures that remind me of when Joshua takes over from Moses, right? God says, hey, listen, man, as long as you follow the Ark of the Covenant, everywhere it goes, you go, everywhere you step, I'm going to give you that land. That promised land is going to be yours as long as you follow the Ark. As long as you follow my presence, it's yours. Same thing here. God's like, hey, man, I want you to go. You follow me. You worship me. This is yours. I'm giving it to you. He takes, it's not there anymore. Sorry. You don't have to put it back up. It's okay. He takes it all and gives it over to his people again, right? God is blessing all of David's efforts for his purpose. Now, this next little idea here is this. David is leading well in victory, verse 15. So all this happens, right? God's blessing for his purpose. David has all these victories. So David reigned over all of Israel, and David administered justice and equity to all his people. So what David does next is, with the Spirit of God, he administers justice and equity among his people. What does that mean? He means all the blessings that have been given, he gives to his people. He is just with them. He leads them fairly. And what I mean by fairly, like he's going to discipline when discipline's needed. He's going to grant mercy when mercy's needed. David is doing the season of doing it the way God wants to, not for his own benefit, but for the purpose of the glory of God. So David is sitting here doing this, and that's why God blessed David, so that David would go and bless his people. That's the channel there. It's not for David to feel like, man, I'm so awesome. And not that we think that way, but sometimes I think we do like it when we do things really well. Then we're like, man, that's it. I've reached it. David's doing this to bless those that he chooses to, and he chooses to do that and rule justly. And God's plan for David to rule with justice was because of his ultimate victory on the cross that he's going to do. God wants David to be used as this vessel for that bigger picture down the road where Jesus comes and atones for all of us. That's the whole process here that we're seeing happen. This is the beginning of that. Now, we know that everything doesn't stay perfect, and we know that not everything's going to work this way, but the end goal is for Jesus, our Redeemer. Here's something important, though, that we notice, because sometimes it's easy in this season. Man, I wish I could be more like David. No, because we kind of are like David, right? David, if we've noticed throughout this whole process, has been on this ebb and flow. He's been on this peak. He's doing awesome. We're writing this story about him. Oh, it's so good. And then he lies and gets someone killed. And then he's on this peak. He's doing awesome. And then he does something else and lies to another king. And he's on this peak, and like David is just like us. He's got this ebb and flow of he's on track with God, he's trying to do everything he can, and then he falls off the cliff altogether, and God has to pick him back up, put him in place. That's who we are, right? That's the thing. When we look at David, it's not about this guy that's great, and we don't model ourselves after this guy. What we model is the picture of what God is doing through all this. That's the thing that we need to see through all of these chapters of all these things that we're doing is what is God doing in this thing? And what he's doing is fulfilling every promise that he's made for his purpose and his glory. God is not going to fall void in everything that he's asking us to do. David is being absolutely everything that God has called him to be. And that's the purpose of why God wanted to bless him in this victory, because he knew that David was going to bless his people for it. It was going to go past David through his people, and his name was going to be glorified. And God was bringing that to the forefront so that David and all of the people of Israel never forget who the King of Kings is and never forget who their Lord is. Now, how do we take that into our lives, right? That means with what happens to us, whether it's a personal thing, whether it's as a church, we see success, we've got to stop forgetting that it's all because God is so good and so gracious and so loving and merciful that he gave it to us to begin with, that we have no choice but to give it back, to be a blessing to others. I know it's inconvenient to be a blessing to others. As a matter of fact, sometimes I just don't like it because it inconveniences me. And to be honest with you, that's the lamest excuse I could give you, right? God has done so much for me, but I'm going to be like, all right, I'll help you out, Brad. Whatever it is. I've never had that issue with Brad, just saying. But like there's times that we just feel like I don't want to be a blessing to others because honestly we like our lives, right? The reason why sin exists is because we're all about us, right? Our sin nature makes this all about us. That's why cults work, because you can manipulate it to be all about you, right? The thing about following God is it's never about you. That's the thing, all this. Now, there's a strength in that for me and an assurance for me that I don't have the pressure of being everything because God is everything. But I want to be faithful to him. And as we're looking at this big picture of David's victories, we're seeing twofold: God's promises being fulfilled, and we're seeing David being faithful to be a blessing to others because God was a blessing to him. We're seeing David take the spoils of war and not keep it for himself. We're seeing David make sure that his people know justly and rightly what it means to know and honor God. That is our responsibility and goal as a people of God, is to make it about him. When we sing songs and praise him, it's about him. When we read his word, it's about him. When we are fellowshipping together, honestly, ultimately, it's about him. We want to create relationships because I want people around me, they're going to make me focus on him. I want people to hold me accountable to focus on him. I want people to push me so that I can look back at him. When I'm going through things and I'm being ridiculous, maybe it's my relationship at home with my wife, maybe it's my friendships I have, whatever's going on. I want people who are like-minded, who are godly in thinking that they want to honor God as well, pushing me back towards him. Because all this is about blessing others because God has blessed us for the purpose of glorifying his name. For the purpose of others hearing about the name of Jesus Christ, for the purpose of people coming to know and trust Jesus as their Lord and Savior, so that they can glorify his name. You see this cycle? That's just the way it's going to keep going. Our responsibility forever and ever is to be able to turn things back to give him glory and honor and praise. That's our role in this big picture. That's what we all have. Now, we all do it differently. Some of us are moms and wives and teachers and dads and businessmen and bankers and all kinds of, we got all these different roles, and there are ways that all of us have the ability to give God honor and glory in our lives by giving him everything that he has given us. And what I mean by that is letting others be blessed because of our blessing. What I'm not asking, and what David isn't even showing here, is I'm not saying we all go and become impoverished because we don't have anything else. No, I'm saying let's let our lives count for the purpose of the glory of God. Let's use everything for that glory. Let's make everything we do something that people look at and be like, man, I don't understand why that person just has this draw to them. And that draw, hopefully, is Jesus Christ. And it's not my persona. I like to think I can charm people sometimes. It's not charming. I think that sometimes. And I find out sometimes it's definitely not that. But anytime that I do have the ability to connect with people, it's got nothing that I'm doing. It's because God's granting me that blessing of being able to connect. It's because God's given me the opportunity to do so. And then the other times, it's just me realizing that I'm not what I think I am. And God is doing all these things. And so the big picture here is we're looking at David's victories. What is God doing in all this? He's fulfilling his promises for the purpose of his glory. It's something we don't think about a lot. We like to make it about us. Like, okay, what about us? Us is about him and his glory. Us is about what he is doing in his glory. That's what us is about. And I know that's not proper English, but that's what we're working with right now. It's about making him known and giving him everything that we can so that others can see and know him as well. And so as we look back at this, it's kind of an exciting story because right here we're going to see this peace fall upon the nation, right? We're going to see David and his people have a season of peace. Now, something also important to find, and we're going to see this in a couple of chapters, often with great victories, right behind it come temptations. Right behind it, because we're on this top, we're on this peak, we're doing great, and we kind of forget the other piece, though, oh, wait, we're still flawed. We still have these things, and we're going to see David fall into that in a couple chapters from here, right? And so, the thing is remembering in those victories, how do we defeat that? I don't know that we're ever going to defeat it, but we're going to continue to cling to Jesus Christ, and we're also going to make sure that those victories, we know where they came from. That's not a cure-all for sin, because we're still going to make that mistake. But the beauty is the cross defeats sin. The cross is how we redeem that relationship and we reconcile that relationship back to Jesus Christ. And so we have to be careful that we don't see the things in our lives that are going wrong. Now, some of you are like, I haven't seen a victory in a long time. That's perfect too, because in those seasons too, God is still doing and working in your lives in ways you don't understand and know. Because it's never about me or you, it's about him. And that, I think, perspective changes the way we see life around us. It changes the way we motivate things. Because when it's about us, yes, things are difficult. Things are hard to deal with. But when it's not about us, it's really not that big of a deal, right? Well, it's about God to begin with, so I guess this is okay. And I'm not saying things will be easy, and I'm not telling you it's not going to be hard to deal with. What I am saying is God is the Lord of all things. He is sovereign over all things. And this big picture, he's going to keep his promises that he has made to us. And that's why we have to be faithful to deliver the gospel to others. We have to be faithful to show love to the community around us. We have to be faithful to encourage them, even when we completely disagree, because we want them to know and see the love of Christ.